I'm very keen for us to look at the Bible together, so we're going to begin to do that. Today we have come to the final part of our Kingdom Citizens series. During this series, we have explored some pretty massive subjects. We've talked about the good news of the kingdom. We've talked about the rescuing king. We've talked about the now and the not yet of the kingdom and all the tension, the difficulty, the challenge we may experience in that. We've talked about the unlikely strategies of this kingdom. We've talked about kingdom of heaven mercy, of money, of generosity, hospitality and mission. In this last talk, I want us to take a look at kingdom citizens themselves. I mean, just what does it take to enter this kingdom? What exactly is a kingdom citizen like? How radical, how amazing, how countercultural might you need to be for all of these incredible things that we know the kingdom of heaven, God's rule and reign to be about? You'd have to be really great, right? I mean, you'd have to be really, really great for all that unexpected good news, mercy, rescuing hospitality. Surely you would. Well, just to make sure there was no confusion about greatness among kingdom citizens, Jesus said these words about entering the kingdom. They're in the Bible, in Matthew's account of Jesus. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives such a child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea." As you can see, we've decided to end this Kingdom Citizen series on a really cheery, upbeat note. Perhaps I could place a child in our midst this morning. I don't know if it's possible to put the image up on the screen. One Wednesday evening, a couple of years ago, he was at home with his family in the Qatari neighborhood of Aleppo. He was having a normal life. Yeah, okay, it turns out that normal, whether or not he knew it, was actually living in some kind of war zone. But that's not all that different to you or I. And not long after those moments of seeming normality, he's pulled out from the debris, the dust, and the darkness of his family home into the spotless, bright light of the back of a paramedic vehicle. There he is, blinking in those bright lights of an ambulance, sitting and staring in stunned silence somewhere round the assembled media. Now, as far as we know, his physical wounds have all healed. I would guess the mental and emotional ones will take slightly longer. But apparently the debate over who took the images and why they took them may never end. However, I think the image remains compelling because of the sort of nothing this young man is saying. He said nothing, apparently, until someone told him that his parents were still alive. But maybe his experience says something about citizens entering the kingdom of heaven. After all, Jesus said, we enter the kingdom of heaven as little children. Not because it's easier that way, not because it's the recommended means of entering the kingdom, not even because it's the best way. But Jesus said, it is impossible any other way. We enter the way that a small child in crisis might enter an ambulance. Because there's no sense of greatness and rank, of merit or status. The kingdom of heaven reverses all of that. Without any sense of social status, entering the kingdom of heaven is much more about immediate need. I say that to prod us just a little bit, because I'm conscious it's so easy to project sort of childish attitudes onto kingdom citizenship. Coming to him like little children with all the innocence, the wonder, the fun-loving, the uncomplicated curiosity, the simple trust in Jesus. Maybe you've done that before, and I have, and I'm sorry if you've had to listen to me say that. Because in this moment, Jesus wants to say one thing about coming to him like little children. He has one thing in mind, just one childlike attribute. Whether or not it's something we associate with children now, and that is humility. The point for Jesus of entering the kingdom of heaven like a little child is humility. That's what he says. It is impossible to enter the kingdom of heaven unhumbly. Apparently that is a word. I checked it. So what is this humble way of entering the kingdom? The first thing I want us to notice about it is that it is God's way. Humility is who God is in his very nature. Hold on a minute. God, like Almighty God, glorious, majestic, creator, him to be worshipped and adored, holy, holy, holy God is what, Steve? Well, turns out he's humble. So as Jesus walks the planet, he chose to be in very nature God, humble. He took up every sense of a servant, the Bible tells us in Philippians 2. Why? So that we would get something about who God is. God is humble. And it's because it's who he is, it's what he gets. It's the kind of people that he relates to. It's what his kingdom citizens will be like. They will be like the king. And so 7 times through the Bible, it reminds us that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. You start to think that if you're going to say it that many times, it kind of matters to you. Now, why might that be? I believe it's because God made us for relationship. He wants to know us, and he wants to be known by us. And you only really know someone when you come to them humbly. If you come to them anything other than humbly, you already know everything you're going to know about them. You realize that because relationships can only really start. Relationships will only ever grow in humility. And God made you for relationship. So he longs that in humility you will not think, hold on, what would a God of love do about that? But, God, you're a God of love. What do you do? Humility comes to listen. If you're not humble towards someone, let's say you already know everything you will ever know about them, you will not be listening the way that humility does. You will not be speaking the truth the way that humility does. Instead, you'll probably be full of your own sense of self-defense, your own self-justification, and your own self-interest. If you're not humble, you will probably never be vulnerable. But God, who is humble, listens. He is the truth, and he made himself utterly vulnerable at the cross for relationship with you. Humility is God's way. But as we think about his kingdom and all that it will achieve and how we might enter it, we have to ask ourselves, is it my way? Is it your way? Is it our way? We enter in humility. Former British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill once said about his political opponent, Clement Attlee, probably heard it before, he is a humble man who has much to be humble about. He of the witty put down. It kind of reminds us how much easier it is to observe and comment on humility in other people than ourselves. To recognize other people's need for humility maybe than our own. But humility is God's way. He came and lived it to show us. And he says to us, how will we live if we are going to enter the kingdom? If we're going to be like him, he says to us, what about you? So if I've said, first of all, it's God's way, the second thing I want to say is that it's just not normal. It's not normal because for most of us, those of us who know anything about our own way, we'd recognize that it is going to require us to change to enter the kingdom like children, to enter humbly. It's going to require some kind of turn. And so Jesus actually uses that word. Unless you turn and become like children, unless you change, unless you demonstrate that kind of humility, you will not enter the kingdom. Because without humility, we will all miss the truth about this kingdom. It is utterly countercultural. You know, we can write our best songs, we can do our best talks, make our coolest Uber videos and socially mediaize them in the best way. But ultimately, the truth of Christianity is a bit shocking. It's not what you'd expect. And it requires us to give up all our sense of normal. Maybe we don't always notice that in our own lives, because becoming a Christian can quite often be a process. And that varies massively from individual to individual. Sometimes, wham, bam, it happens in a moment. Other times, it's a process that happens quite subtly over some while. But what cannot happen is that it sort of happens without anybody noticing, without any sense of need or of rescue or of change. We may not recognize it at the time, but we should be able to look back and see the difference. And sure, yep, you don't have to be an expert in self-awareness. Sometimes you can't see the difference and other people spot it in you first. That's allowed. But being a Christian does change us. If we haven't, we may not have understood what we need, the rescue that we need. We may not have recognized the humility with which we come to God. We may just be happy to add God to our already quite a nice person sort of life. If there's no difference, what is there? Which kingdom are we in? Jesus has called you into his kingdom. And this will involve you in some measure leaving your normal life. It always does. Entering the kingdom always does. Knowing that you need to leave your normal life to change following Jesus is a good sign. It's a sign that your humble-ometer is switched on and is registering humility properly. Entering the kingdom is humble. It's God's thing. It's not normal, and it's not just about you. It's counting others differently. And that's what Jesus is getting at as he's speaking about who receives these other little children. He's not suddenly gone from what it means to follow him to a mini seminar on TKC Kids or on parenting or something. He's saying if you are to come like a little child, I wonder how you're going to behave around other little children. You work out the other little children are the people maybe just like you who are also entering the kingdom of heaven. Because when we enter into this kingdom as children, we are called to receive other kingdom entering children equally humbly. We listen, we speak the truth, and we are vulnerable. We're not called to judge them. Receiving as a child is recognizing that our ultimate gift is given to us who are helpless and unworthy, given by grace alone. We are kingdom citizens receiving this gracious gift without any sense of due or right or merit or qualification or any prior claim. And so Jesus says some, frankly, pretty strong words. There's talk of millstones and deep seas, which maybe it's helpful to know at the time was a form of death penalty, a kind of judgment that had been meted out on people by the Romans and other authorities of that day. Because what he's trying to say is, look, if you're not going to receive others like little children entering the kingdom, if you're not going to receive them humbly, presumably you're just going to get way too proud about it. Perhaps you prefer to be judging them. What he's saying is, if you want to go down the judging route, I'll tell you what, you'd be better off with human judgment, as harsh as that is. Is that what you want? I think everyone's going to not take too long to think about that, are they? It's not that the point is, now what do I do in this kingdom that kind of avoid the millstone thing? He's trying to say, no, that's not the point. I don't want to live in a way that's judging and subject to human judgment. I want to enter this kingdom as a child, remembering my heavenly judge, Remembering I'm called to something different, to a different place, with a different way of assessing people. It's what assessed me in my humility as I enter this kingdom, and it's now what assesses this person or this person or this person in as they are looking to enter the kingdom humbly. It's going to challenge us. So I don't think the point is that we consider being unkind to other people or whether it's worth the hassle. It's a measure of how differently God treats us and wants us to treat others. I think it would better lead us to ask, where are the little children? Who are the people that God wants to call to enter into his kingdom? Who are those who don't seem to qualify, who are insignificant and powerless in our day? Who is it that needs a rescue? Who has no voice, no status, no rights or recognition? Who do kingdom citizens associate with? How do they associate with them? So it turns out as we look at what kingdom citizens, what entering the kingdom, being a kingdom citizen is about, do you know what? That it's not just about me. Funny that Jesus never was he? God, who humbly calls us to himself, calls us to each other and to a radically different way of living and relating together, responding to other kingdom citizens humbly. What will we do? Who are we in the face of that? How do we respond to a God who comes to us with such tenderness, whose invitation to us is so extraordinary, whose response to us is so unexpected? How does that colour how we relate to each other? That is entering the kingdom like little children.